Welcome everybody to this Connect with BMC Helix ITSM and Remedy webinar. Today we are talking about consuming REST API for integration, and LJ Longwing will take us through this content. Over to you, LJ.
Thanks, Greg. As Greg just said, today we're talking about REST and consuming services through REST. So the agenda for today is why are we going to be using REST? What are RESTful web services? Publishing versus consumption. 1908 and beyond, prior to 1908, and some links and references for you at the end of it. Why are we using REST? REST is one of many technologies available. Historically, we're looking at possibly using SOAP, but today the integration technology of choice seems to be REST. It's currently in vogue. It's a simple implementation. You've been using REST most of your work life, even if you didn't realize it. Just simply going to a web page and doing searches quite often uses REST to implement. So it is a smaller payload than SOAP. SOAP uses XML traditionally as its medium, and REST uses JSON, which has less overhead. So it's a simpler, smaller payload than XML and is generally preferred when using REST. RESTful web services. They're using HTTP to communicate. So like I said, you've been using REST most of your career, whether you realized it or not. If you're on a browser and you're performing a query via the browser, it's using REST. The four main methods used within REST are get, post, put, and delete. Those are, in the REST world, generally referred to as the CRUD methods, which are create, request, update, and delete. So a create is going to usually be a post, a request is usually going to be a get, an update is going to be a put, and a delete is obviously a delete. There are about half a dozen other common methods that are used in REST, but those are the four main ones that are used for a vast majority of the services out there. REST differs from SOAP in that it's not as structured. SOAP has a contract. SOAP has a WSDL that defines, what everything's happening. Authentication always happens the same way. It's all very structured. REST is more of a Wild West of the integration. It's really up to the implementation of the service you're going to be connecting to determine how you authenticate, what headers are going to be necessary, what body is going to be necessary, if any, and what sort of response is going to be returned. So just want to talk for a second for publishing versus consumption. So publishing is what the other service that you're talking to is going to be doing, and consumption is what you do. Remedy has been publishing RESTful services since 9.0. Okay, this is a third-party instance that's going to be connecting to Remedy to do those CRUD requests that I was referring to. Creating requests in your system, updating requests in your system, getting information from your system, deleting information from your system. That's all third parties making a connection to your server to manipulate your data. Okay, Remedy has been doing that since 9.0. There are third-party libraries available that actually enable CRUD for pre-9.0 Remedy as well. Okay, consumption is the primary thing we're discussing here today. Consumption is Remedy reaching out to another system to grab information or push information to the external system so that you can integrate your Remedy system triggers that are happening within Remedy to notify external systems of things that need to happen. So that is available within Remedy from 1908 and beyond. Okay, prior to 1908, you needed to use a third-party library that was developed to get that capability. Okay, as I mentioned, 1908 and beyond. In order for Remedy natively to consume RESTful services, you must have both the Remedy server and Developer Studio upgraded. There were changes in the server and the Dev Studio code to enable this, so you have to be running at least that version to be able to consume RESTful services through workflow. Okay, it's very similar to the way that SOAP has worked for many, many years. It is in a filter, it is in a set field action, and it is one of the sources for a set field action. So you see in this list, we've got web service. We also have REST API now as one of the options that we can do set fields from. When we take a look at that set field section, we have several fold out sections here. The first one is going to be what method are you going to be using? Okay. The methods, as I mentioned before, get, post, put, delete. That is query information, that is create information, that is update information, and that is delete information. The method that you use is dependent upon the service that you are talking to and the action you're trying to take. We've also got content type. The only option available at this point through Remedy is application JSON. When we continue looking down from there, we see that there's a URI, path, and query parameters. Okay, your URI is going to be the base URL of the service that you are wanting to talk to. Okay, the path parameters, those are going to be anything past the path that you're going to be using to connect to this service. And I'm going to be doing a demo and giving some examples a little bit later in this presentation. Okay, and your query parameters are key value pairs that you want passed as part of the URL. Okay, authentication. As I mentioned, REST is kind of the Wild West of integrations. Some things require you to do authentication via, a user ID and password. Okay, some of them require OAuth. Remedy itself uses an ARJWT, which stands for Java Web Token. Okay, you can also be authenticating via RSSO. Some systems don't actually have you do quote-unquote authentication at all. They actually have you provide an API key in the header. Or in the example we'll be doing today, there's actually an API key in the URL. So the implementation of how you authenticate, if at all, is entirely up to the person that implemented the service that you're going to be connecting to. So Remedy has to offer a lot of options to be able to allow for those for that authentication to work within the service that you're trying to connect to. Headers. I mentioned those just a minute ago. Some things that you're going to be doing, like content type, that's a header. Okay, as I said, that is currently application JSON only. But any other headers you need to provide in here, which may or may not be authentication related, or may not be just the response type. There's such an unlimited amount of information that might be required as part of your headers. So this is the opportunity here for custom headers to be added to the call that you're making out to the external system. The next section we have here is the response, or the request response mapping. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to provide the request. You can either do a static body, which is you pasting in a format that is required by the external system, and you can do field value replacements in that static body, or you can build up the request mapping and the response mapping as field value pairs. Now, here I mentioned that it's pipe delimited. So if the field that you're looking for is in the, if you're needing to provide open squirrely bracket, users, open squirrely bracket, username. Okay, that would be users pipe username as the field or the JSON key. And the request and response mappings both allow you to pull from a dynamic range of forms and fields. So just like in SOAP, when you make a call out to an external system and they return 5 records for you, you actually have the ability to specify that those will be 5 records in another form. And I'll be demoing that as part of today's demo. Okay, and then when you're dealing with attachments, this is when you're dealing with what's essentially called multipart. So when you're sending attachments, some of the, instead of just a straight JSON document that you're sending over to your external system, it's actually going to be a multi-part body. The first part is going to be your JSON data, and the second part is going to be your attachment data. Okay, so in order to communicate with the external systems using attachments, it's a bit more complex, but the Remedy implementation is flexible enough to allow for attachment communication. And within the multi-part info, you're going to provide the key that you're putting your data into and the value, which is going to be your attachment field, into this section, and that's actually going to allow you to provide attachments on the outbound to external systems. Prior to 1908, BMC Remedy did not have an ability to consume RESTful services out of the box. A third-party developer put together a plugin that works in 7.6 plus, and it can work in on-prem or cloud-based solutions. So if you're not on 1908 and you want to consume RESTful services, you still have that ability. Because it's not provided by BMC, it's not going to be available out of the box, but it is possible to configure that plugin and get that functionality built in. So the demo we're going to be doing today is actually a very simplistic one that has absolutely nothing to do with information technology. It's not an IT example. It's something that we can all relate to. The demo I built out for you today is relating to music. So we all know the music that we want to listen to, and our favorite artists have albums, and we want to be able to look up what albums our artist has. So what we're going to be doing for our demo today is we're actually going to be making a call out to a RESTful service out on the internet by the name of last.fm. We're going to be making a call to the API show artist get top albums, and the input we're going to be providing is the artist name. That is going to make the call out to the external system. It's going to return a list of the albums to us, and it's going to list it in a table. So let's go ahead and get started with that demo. So here's the finished product. The finished product looks like this. We're just going to go ahead and type in an artist name. It's going to make a call out to the external system. And that external system is going to return a list for us of all of the albums that Cher has released and the play count of those albums on the Last.fm platform. Let's take a look at the definition of what that is, how that works, and how we came to be able to make that call through Remedy. So the first thing I did was I went out to the Last.fm website, okay, and I said, how do I pull this information back? Okay, here's a list of all of the different methods that they support. In this case, we're looking at artist, get top albums. Okay, so when I clicked on that, we come up with this page here. So example URLs. So it says that we can request information in JSON or we can request it in XML. So it gives us the URL that's going to be used. And we can notice that we've got an and format equals JSON in the URL. And if we're looking for XML, we can see that it's exactly the same URL, but it does not have that key value pair format equals JSON. So listed here are all of the parameters that we have the option of applying here. And you'll notice some of them say required, some of them say optional. Okay, so we take a look at those and we say okay, and we look at authorization. The service does not require authentication. Okay, but up here in the params we see API key is required, and you have to get a key from Last.fm in order to be able to make calls to their system. This key is free, and all you have to do is log in or create an account, log in, and it gives you an API key. Okay, and here's a sample response. Well, this sample response here is actually in XML, as we can tell. Well, this isn't what we're looking for. We're actually looking for an example in JSON, but they don't bother providing an example in JSON. So what I did was I pulled out my handy RESTful client, Postman. Okay, Postman is a RESTful client that we use to just do REST calls, do various testing, and verify that things are working properly on the external system, just to make sure that we're getting the data we need. So what I did was I went out and I got my API key. I took a look and I copied this, and you can actually see in the status bar down at the bottom that despite the fact that they're just providing me everything past it, I can also see that my web server is ws.audioscrobbler.com. So what I did was I came over here to Postman, and I provided all of that information, and I said, hey, I want to look up Share. That's the artist I'm looking up here. And I've got my API key, and I tell it I've got a format of JSON, and I make that call. And we can see that I'm returning this information back. Okay, so I can see that we've got our open scribble. We've got top albums, album, name of the album, and the play count of the album. So I'm going to use that information to pull those two pieces of information back. Because if we remember, those are the two pieces of information I'm pulling back, the play count and the title. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up my workflow. So first thing I need to do is I'm going to build my front-end form. Okay, my front-end form contains the artist that I'm looking for, a button that allows me to retrieve the information, and a table that displays the results. Okay, I build up the form that the information is going to be put into. Okay, so I've got a GUID that is being passed from my primary form. Each child record has a local GUID, so the call can determine whether or not that record already exists or not. And then the two columns that I'm pulling back, the play count and the title. Okay, so first I've got an active link that fires on return or press of the button. First thing it does is it generates a GUID, which is going to be the GUID that links my call, or the screen I'm on, to the child records that are returned by the web service call. Then I'm going to make a service call to my form, REST trigger. Okay, that service call is going to cause a filter to be fired, which is what's actually going to kick off the information that I want to pull back. And then I've got a change field action, which is simply going to perform a refresh on that table field so I can see the results of my call. Okay, on the filters, I've got two filters. So I'll explain this in just one moment, but I've got one filter that fires execution order 450 called replace space. Okay, that filter literally replaces space with a plus character. Okay, and I'll explain why it's doing that here in a moment. But I do a replace of space with a plus, and then on my actual filter that's doing the work, I go and I do a lookup of my API key from a config form and set it into the assign to field. Okay, and then when I'm making my REST call, notice I've got a SetFields with a data source of REST API, and I'm going to be performing an HTTP method of GET with a content type of application JSON. In my base URL, you can see that I've got the http://ws.audioscrobbler.com. And then the path params, this should look very familiar to you because we're just looking at the documentation. We're doing 2.0, question method equals artist get top albums. And artist is the artist that I passed in from my active link. And the API key is the API key that I just looked up from my SetFields above. And format equals JSON and autocorrect equals 1. Now, I don't have any query parameters because everything in this particular REST method is being passed in the paths. Okay? Again, as I noticed, or as I pointed out before, there is no authentication. Okay? And I don't have to provide any custom headers, so I can just leave those blank. Okay? And then, if we go back to the results that we got out of Postman, we remember that it was top albums, album, name. Okay, an album is an array. We can tell it's an array because of this square bracket. So top albums, album, name, and play count. So within Remedy, on my response mapping, again, there's no request mapping because I'm not sending anything in the body of the request. But I say top albums, album is my top level JSON key, and its field name is GUID. Okay, and then for the second, and you'll notice that that's on REST trigger. For the second sections, you'll notice that I've got top albums album play count and top albums album name, and it is returning to REST return. So it's actually going to be creating child records. Okay, and the destination is play count and title, and the primary key and foreign key are GUID, which are GUID on the individual forms in question, and the distinguishing key is going to be local GUID. So we look at that, and of course I'm not doing any attachment information, so we have no multipart info. Okay, so when we make this call, what it's essentially doing is it is doing the same thing that the postman is doing when we make this call, and it's going to parse out the returns, and it's going to find this array right here is going to be a multi-row return, and it's going to be putting the name and the play count for each record in this array. So we notice we've got believe, and then we scroll down and we've got another record, the very best of share, and then we've got another record, heart of stone. And when we make that call over here, we type in share and we hit enter, or we press retrieve, and it automatically pulls all those records back, automatically limiting to 50 records. And then I have this table set to perform that query against that result set, sorting by play count and then title. So I can see that Believe is the top played album by share on Last.fm. So as you can see from the demo that we just did, we've got a remedy application, we've got a form, we make a REST API call out to Last.fm, artist get top albums, it performs its call, and it returns that information back through the API, stores that information in local forms within Remedy. So, references. How do you consume REST APIs in 1908? Okay, here's the link to be able to read that doc page on how to do everything that I was just describing here. Prior to 1908, if you're wanting to consume REST APIs, you need to go to the third-party remedylegacy.com website, download the plugin from there, and you can install and configure that using the docs that are provided in that. And third-party publishing prior to 9.0, if you are still not running 9.0 and you're wanting to publish REST services, you can go to this communities link, which has a link and documentation of how to set up REST API publishing for servers that are pre-9.0. So, the summary. Within Remedy, you have the ability on any and a lot of unsupported versions of Remedy to consume REST services and integrate your Remedy server with those external services. If you're looking at 1908, you have that ability to do that in a fully BMC supported construct. If it's prior to 1908, or in the case of publishing prior to 9.0, there are third-party tools out there available that allow you to do what it is you are wanting to do without the restrictions of versions. There is, however, the problem of those third-party libraries are not supported by BMC, but they are still good tools that work well. Back to you, Greg.
Thank you, LJ. And that will conclude our session for this month's Connect with Remedy. And I will talk about self-help and contacting BMC. We have a YouTube channel that is available with a lot of webinars and how-to videos. This is where this live broadcast will be published. The schedule for our Connect with webinars is available in this communities document. And also the hot off the press newsletter that has a lot of trending information, a lot of new and exciting links are available in there. You can visit that site and follow it. And as always, contacting technical support via web, phone, email, as well as these social channels. That will conclude this live webinar. Thank you for participating. Have a good day.